The telegram arrived on a sweltering July afternoon in 1878, bearing news that crushed Fiona Blackwood's last remaining hope. Standing in the cramped Boston telegraph office, she clutched the yellow paper with trembling fingers as the words blurred before her eyes. Regret to inform arrangement terminated, stop unsuitable for family requirement, stop payment returned forthwith, stop. The fourth rejection in as many months, this time from a widower in Sacramento who had never even met her. Fiona folded the telegram carefully and tucked it into her reticule alongside the others. At 26, she was well past the age when most women had secured a husband, established a household, and birthed at least 2 children. But here she was, alone in the world save for a dwindling inheritance and a reputation for being peculiar that followed her like a persistent shadow. "Miss Blackwood," the telegraph operator regarded her with thinly veiled curiosity. "Will there be a reply?" She shook her head. "No, thank you, Mr. Davis." Stepping out into the humid air, Fiona adjusted her spectacles and considered her narrowing options. Her landlady had made it clear that without renewed payment, she would be evicted by month's end. The small inheritance from her father, a professor of natural history, whose scholarly pursuits had left little in the way of financial security, was nearly depleted after funeral expenses, and her desperate attempts to secure passage west as a mail-order bride. Her fingers traced the edge of the newspaper folded in her pocket, the same paper that held one remaining advertisement she had circled in hopeful ink that morning. One final chance in a place called Whispering Pines, Wyoming Territory. That evening, Fiona sat at her small writing desk, carefully composing what would be her last attempt. She was honest this time. No carefully edited descriptions of herself, no strategic omissions of her peculiarities. If this was to be her final chance, she would present herself truthfully, her passion for scientific observation, her habit of collecting specimens, her inability to engage in mindless social chatter, and her fierce independence. She enclosed the last of her daguerreotype portraits, one that captured her high forehead, serious green eyes behind round spectacles, and thick auburn hair pulled back in a practical style. 10 days later, her few possessions were packed in 2 modest trunks. Her specimen collection, carefully preserved beetles, pressed flowers, and geological samples, occupied much of the space, leaving little room for clothing. But Fiona had prioritized what mattered most to her. The journey west was arduous. The train carried her across vast expanses of landscape that gradually transformed from the familiar lush greenery of the east to sweeping prairies, and eventually the rugged terrain of the territories. Each mile marked her increasing distance from everything she had known and her approach toward an uncertain future. Fiona arrived in Whispering Pines on a clear September day. The small frontier town was nestled in a valley surrounded by pine-covered hills that rustled with a constant whisper in the wind, thus its apt name. As she descended from the stagecoach, stretching her cramped limbs, Fiona surveyed the single dusty main street with its wooden boardwalks and assortment of buildings. A general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other establishments comprised the heart of the settlement. She smoothed her travel-worn skirts and adjusted her spectacles, scanning the faces of those who had gathered to witness the stagecoach's arrival. No one stepped forward to claim her. "Miss Blackwood?" The stagecoach driver set her trunks on the ground beside her. "This is your stop, correct?" "Yes, thank you." Fiona tried to mask her uncertainty. "I was to meet a Mr. Howard Tanner." The driver exchanged glances with a bystander. "Tanner's place is about 3 miles north of town. Don't reckon he's coming in today, though." "I see." Fiona maintained her composure, though her heart sank. "Is there an establishment where I might secure lodging for the night?" "There's Mrs. Winter's boarding house down the street," the driver pointed. "But I should tell you, miss, thank you for your assistance." Fiona interrupted, not wanting to hear whatever piece of gossip or warning was forthcoming. She had enough experience with people's opinions of her arrangements. Hiring a local boy to transport her trunks, Fiona made her way to the boarding house, a two-story white clapboard building with a wide porch. Mrs. Winters, a plump woman with shrewd eyes, took in Fiona's appearance with undisguised curiosity. "You must be the mail-order bride Tanner sent for," she said without preamble as Fiona signed the guest register. "I am indeed expected by Mr. Tanner," Fiona replied cautiously. Mrs. Winters pressed her lips together. "Well, you're welcome to stay the night. $1 including supper and breakfast." That evening, as Fiona sat alone at supper, the whispers around her were impossible to ignore. Tanner's fourth attempt? It won't last a week out there. Strange one himself, but even he has limits. Fiona ate mechanically, her appetite diminished by anxiety. Her funds would not sustain her for long if this arrangement, too, fell through. When she retired to her small room, sleep eluded her as she contemplated what morning might bring. At breakfast, a commotion outside drew her attention. Through the window, she observed a wagon pulling up, driven by a weathered man with a thick gray beard. Mrs. Winters appeared at her elbow. "That's Lyle Jenkins, works Tanner's ranch," her voice lowered. "Tanner sent word he's reconsidered the arrangement. Jenkins is to give you funds for return passage east." The floor seemed to shift beneath Fiona's feet. "I see." She gathered her dignity around her like armor. "Then I shall speak with Mr. Jenkins directly." Outside, the ranch hand removed his hat as she approached. "Miss Blackwood." "I'm Lyle Jenkins. Mr. Tanner sent me to inform me he has changed his mind," Fiona finished for him. "May I ask on what grounds, Mr. Jenkins?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Well, madam, Mr. Tanner received a letter from someone back east, said you were." He cleared his throat. "Peculiar in your ways, not suited to ranch life." Anger flared in Fiona's chest. Someone from Boston wrote to him. Who would? Then realization dawned. The widower in Sacramento must have corresponded with her previous potential matches. The gossip about her had traveled faster than she had. "Mr. Jenkins," she said with forced calm, "I have traveled over 2,000 miles at considerable personal expense. I would appreciate the opportunity to at least meet Mr. Tanner before he dismisses me." Jenkins twisted his hat in his hands. "Mr. Tanner was quite clear, madam. He's a private man and doesn't want any complications." "I see." Fiona straightened her spine. "Then please convey to Mr. Tanner that I decline his offer of return passage. I have come to Wyoming Territory, and in Wyoming Territory I shall remain." Jenkins blinked in surprise. "Madam, there ain't many options for a single lady out here." "Then I shall have to create some," Fiona replied. "Good day, Mr. Jenkins." Returning to her room, Fiona assessed her situation with scientific detachment. She had approximately $40 remaining, her education, her wits, and her determination. The West was full of opportunity, or so the newspapers claimed. Surely there was a place for her. By midday, Fiona had secured temporary lodging in a small room above the general store in exchange for helping the proprietor, Mrs. Miller, with inventory and bookkeeping. The arrangement would provide her with shelter and a modest wage while she considered her next move. The following days saw Fiona establishing a routine. Mornings were spent organizing the store's chaotic stock system and implementing a logical inventory method that impressed Mrs. Miller. Afternoons allowed her to explore the surrounding area, collecting botanical specimens and making detailed sketches in her journal. She avoided social interactions when possible, acutely aware of the curious and often judgmental gazes that followed her. It was during one of her excursions, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, that Fiona's path crossed with that of Luke McAllister. She was crouched beside a small stream, examining an unusual mineral formation, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. The rider pulled his horse to a stop several yards away, regarding her with undisguised curiosity. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the open sky. Dark hair curled from beneath his hat, and a short beard framed a face that somehow managed to look both weathered and youthful at once. "Afternoon, madam," he called, touching the brim of his hat. "You're a fair piece from town." Fiona rose, brushing dirt from her skirts. I am aware of my location, sir. I'm conducting geological observations. The man dismounted, leading his horse closer. Geological? You mean you're looking at rocks, among other things? Yes. Fiona adjusted her spectacles. This area displays fascinating sedimentary patterns that suggest it was once beneath an ancient sea. Instead of the dismissive response she expected, the man's face lit with interest. Is that so? I always wondered about the shell-like impressions in some of the rocks around here. Surprised, Fiona found herself explaining the basics of fossil formation as the stranger listened attentively. When she finished, he extended his hand. Luke McAllister, I ranch about 5 miles west of here. Fiona Blackwood. She hesitated before accepting his handshake, noting his strong, calloused grip. You're new to Whispering Pines, he observed. Staying with Mrs. Miller, I hear. News travels quickly in small communities, Fiona remarked dryly. Luke grinned, revealing a slightly crooked front tooth that somehow enhanced rather than detracted from his appearance. That it does, though I reckon not all the news has been accurate. Oh, Fiona raised an eyebrow. Well, according to Barney over at the saloon, you're either a witch studying potions in the wilderness or a bluestocking running from a scandal back east. His eyes twinkled with amusement. But you don't look much like a witch to me, Miss Blackwood. Despite herself, Fiona felt her lips twitch. How disappointing for Mr. Barney. I've never attempted to brew a potion in my life, though I do study botanical specimens for scientific purposes. And the scandal? My only scandal is being precisely who I am without apology, she replied, a trait that has proven surprisingly controversial. Luke's expression sobered. I heard about Tanner, man's a fool, Fiona stiffened. You know about that arrangement, like you said, news travels fast, Luke shrugged. For what it's worth, Howard Tanner's known for having poor judgment. Last year he tried breeding his best mare with a half-blind stallion because the price was right. A startled laugh escaped Fiona. I'm not certain whether to be offended or relieved by the comparison. Take it as a compliment, Luke advised, mounting his horse again. Tanner wouldn't recognize quality if it kicked him in the head. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Blackwood. Watch out for rattlers on your way back to town. As he rode away, Fiona found herself staring after him with an unfamiliar sensation in her chest. It wasn't until she resumed her specimen collecting that she realized what it was. For the first time since arriving in Whispering Pines, someone had spoken to her as a person worthy of respect rather than as an oddity to be whispered about. The encounter lingered in her thoughts as she returned to town. Luke McAllister had seemed genuinely interested in her geological observations, not simply humoring her as men often did when she spoke of scientific matters. It was refreshing. Over the next several weeks, Fiona found herself unexpectedly crossing paths with Luke McAllister with increasing frequency. He would appear at the general store just as she was organizing the new shipment of goods, or she would encounter him at the post office when she went to mail her letters to scientific correspondents back east. During one such encounter, as Fiona was leaving the store with a package of new botanical paper, Luke fell into step beside her. Miss Blackwood, he greeted her, I've been meaning to ask. There's a formation of rocks on my property that reminds me of what you described, strange colors and layers. Would you have an interest in examining them? Fiona regarded him with surprise. You're inviting me to your ranch to look at rocks, Mr. McAllister? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds less exciting than I intended, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. But yes, essentially. I could bring you out there and back before sundown. Fiona hesitated. The invitation seemed innocent enough, but she was acutely aware of how such an outing might appear to the townsfolk who already regarded her with suspicion. I appreciate the invitation, but I understand your concern, Luke interrupted gently. How about this? Mrs. Miller could accompany us, a proper chaperone to protect your reputation. The fact that he had anticipated her worry and offered a solution touched Fiona unexpectedly. That would be acceptable, she found herself saying, if Mrs. Miller is willing. Mrs. Miller was indeed willing, almost suspiciously eager, in fact. The following Saturday found the three of them in Luke's wagon, heading west out of town toward his property. The day was clear and crisp, autumn painting the landscape in vibrant hues. "How long have you been in Wyoming territory, Mr. McAllister?" Fiona asked as they traveled. "Coming on 8 years now," he replied. "Came out after the war with nothing but determination and a bad shoulder that still aches when it rains." "You fought in the war between the states?" Mrs. Miller inquired. Luke nodded. "Union cavalry, not something folks around here always appreciate hearing, but I've never been one to hide it." "That would make you approximately 35, Fiona calculated aloud, then immediately flushed at her forthrightness. Luke chuckled. 36 next month, Miss Blackwood, and you?" "A gentleman doesn't ask a lady's age," Mrs. Miller chided. 26, Fiona answered anyway. "Though I'm often told I seem older." "Because of your education and scientific interests," Luke guessed. "Precisely. Many find it unsettling in a woman." Luke's expression grew serious. "Education is never wasted, regardless of who possesses it. My mother taught me that. She was a schoolteacher before she married my father." The sincerity in his voice silenced Fiona's usual defensive response. Instead, she found herself studying his profile as he guided the horses, the straight nose, the firm jaw beneath his beard, the smile lines around his eyes that suggested he laughed often. Luke's ranch came into view as they crested a gentle hill. Unlike the larger cattle operations in the area, his was modest in size but meticulously maintained. A sturdy 2-story house stood as the centerpiece, surrounded by several outbuildings. Fenced pastures held horses and a small herd of cattle. A creek wound through the property, bordered by cottonwood trees showing their autumn gold. "It's not much compared to some," Luke said, accurately reading her assessment, "but it's mine, free and clear." "It's lovely," Fiona replied honestly. "You've created something substantial here." Luke's expression warmed at her approval. "Let me show you those rock formations I mentioned. They're down by the creek." The afternoon passed with surprising swiftness. The rock formations indeed proved fascinating, a series of exposed layers that Fiona identified as containing fossilized remains of ancient sea creatures. Luke listened attentively as she explained the geological processes that had created them, asking intelligent questions that revealed a keen mind beneath his unassuming exterior. Mrs. Miller, after a token period serving as chaperone, retreated to the shade of the porch with a glass of lemonade provided by Luke's housekeeper, an older woman named Martha, who regarded Fiona with open curiosity. "Mr. McAllister hasn't brought a lady visitor to the ranch in all the years I've worked here," Martha remarked as she served them supper later, a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. "Mrs. Miller and Miss Blackwood are here because of Miss Blackwood's scientific expertise," Luke explained, though a flush colored his neck above his collar. "Of course," Martha replied with knowing eyes that made Fiona study her plate intently. As they prepared to return to town in the fading light, Luke handed Fiona a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. "Found this while you were examining the creek bank. Thought you might want to add it to your collection." Unwrapping it, Fiona discovered a perfectly preserved fossil of a spiral-shelled creature. "A prehistoric ammonite," she breathed, tracing its delicate whorls. "It's beautiful. Reminded me of you," Luke said quietly. When she looked up in surprise, he continued, "Complex patterns that most people don't take the time to understand properly." The ride back to town was mostly silent, with Mrs. Miller dozing against the side of the wagon. Fiona was acutely aware of Luke beside her, his arm occasionally brushing hers as he guided the horses through the darkening landscape. "Thank you for today," she said as they approached the outskirts of Whispering Pines. "It was unexpectedly pleasant." Luke's smile was visible in the fading light. High praise indeed from a woman who collects rocks for enjoyment. "They're specimens," Fiona corrected automatically, then caught the teasing glint in his eye. "You're mocking me." "Not mocking," Luke assured her. "Admiring, there's a difference." When they reached Mrs. Miller's store, Luke helped both women down from the wagon with gentle hands. His fingers lingered on Fiona's arm a moment longer than necessary. "Perhaps you might be interested in examining some unusual plant specimens I've noticed on the North Ridge," he suggested. "Another scientific expedition." Before Fiona could respond, Mrs. Miller interjected, "I'd be happy to chaperone again next Saturday." Luke's grin broadened. "Saturday it is, then." As Fiona prepared for bed that night, she found herself replaying moments from the day the way Luke had listened so intently to her explanations, his evident pride in his ranch, the thoughtful gift of the fossil. She placed the ammonite on her small bedside table, its ancient spiral catching the lamplight. For the first time since arriving in Whispering Pines, Fiona felt something akin to belonging. It was a dangerous feeling, one that had led to disappointment before. And yet, as she drifted towards sleep, she couldn't quite suppress the warm flutter of hope in her chest. The following weeks brought more scientific expeditions with Luke, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Miller, who seemed increasingly pleased with the arrangement. Fiona's collection of specimens grew, as did her knowledge of the surrounding landscape. More significantly, her understanding of Luke McAllister deepened with each outing. She learned that he had come west with nothing, working as a ranch hand until he could afford to purchase a small plot of land. Through determination and intelligence, he had expanded his holdings and established a respected, if modest, ranch. He read voraciously history, science, poetry whenever he could spare the time from his demanding work. He treated his few ranch hands fairly and was known for helping neighbors in need without expectation of repayment. For his part, Luke seemed genuinely fascinated by Fiona's scientific knowledge and her perspective on the world. He never dismissed her interests as eccentric or inappropriate, instead encouraging her to share her observations and theories. "Most men find my intellectual pursuits off-putting," Fiona remarked one afternoon as they examined a series of unusual plants growing along a rocky hillside. Luke considered this as he held a branch aside for her to pass. "Most men are intimidated by women with minds of their own, makes them feel less important somehow." "And you're not intimidated," Fiona challenged, suddenly wanting to understand what drew him to her company. Luke's expression grew thoughtful. "I reckon I've faced enough real dangers in life not to fear a woman who knows more than I do about certain subjects." His eyes met hers directly. "Besides, I find your passion for understanding the world around you admirable. Reminds me that there's always more to learn, more to discover." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of mutual respect that transcended the usual boundaries between men and women in their society. As autumn deepened toward winter, Fiona's position in Whispering Pines gradually transformed. Her efficient management had significantly improved the general store's profitability, earning Mrs. Miller's genuine appreciation. Her knowledge of medicinal plants had proven valuable when the doctor was away, treating injuries and illnesses with effective herbal remedies that gained the grudging respect of townsfolk, who had initially dismissed her as peculiar. Most significantly, her association with Luke McAllister, a man respected throughout the community, had conferred a measure of acceptance she had never before experienced. The whispers about her continued, but their tone had shifted from suspicious to curious, sometimes even admiring. It was during the town's harvest festival in late October that Fiona first recognized the depth of her feelings for Luke. The community had gathered in the town square for music, dancing, and shared food. Lanterns hung from posts, casting a warm glow over the festivities as night fell. Fiona had attended reluctantly, at Mrs. Miller's insistence. She stood at the periphery, watching couples twirl to the lively fiddle music, feeling simultaneously apart from and yet somehow connected to the celebration. The sensation was so unfamiliar that it took her a moment to identify it. She was beginning to feel at home here. "Miss Blackwood." She turned to find Luke beside her, looking uncharacteristically formal in a clean shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed beneath his best hat. He extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" Fiona hesitated. "I'm not much of a dancer, Mr. McAllister." "Neither am I," he admitted with a smile, but I reckon we might be awkward together rather than separately." She placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her to the edge of the dancing area. His arm slipped around her waist, maintaining a respectful distance while still holding her securely. As they began to move to the music, Fiona was acutely aware of his strength, the warmth of his hand against hers, the subtle scent of soap and leather that seemed to define him. "People are watching," she murmured, noting the curious glances directed their way. "Let them," Luke replied simply. "I'm not concerned with their opinions." "That's easy for you to say. You've established your place here. I'm still the strange woman who collects specimens and was rejected as a mail-order bride." Luke's steps faltered slightly. "Is that how you see yourself? It's how others see me." His hand tightened on hers. "Not everyone." The certainty in his voice drew her eyes to his face. What she saw there, admiration, respect, and something deeper, warmer, made her breath catch. For a moment, the music and the crowd seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in a pool of lantern light. The spell was broken by a harsh voice nearby. McAllister dancing with the witch woman. "What next?" Luke stiffened, his expression darkening as he scanned for the source of the comment. Fiona laid a restraining hand on his arm. "It doesn't matter," she said softly. "It matters to me," Luke growled. His eyes found Howard Tanner standing with several other ranchers, their expressions ranging from amusement to disgust. "Please," Fiona urged, "don't make a scene on my account." Luke reluctantly yielded to her request, but his jaw remained tight as they completed their dance in silence. When the music ended, he escorted her to a quiet corner near the refreshment table. "I apologize for Tanner's behavior," he said, his voice low with controlled anger. "You're not responsible for his actions," Fiona replied. "Besides, I've heard worse." "That doesn't make it acceptable." Luke's eyes held hers intently. "You deserve better, Fiona." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a flutter through her chest. Before she could respond, Howard Tanner approached, clearly having imbibed freely from the whiskey being passed around among the men. "McAllister," he called, loud enough to draw attention. "Didn't think you were desperate enough to court my leavings." Luke's body tensed beside her. "Tanner, you're drunk. Go home before you say something you'll regret," Tanner sneered. Already regretting I ever considered her for a wife, heard she was peculiar but didn't know she was downright unnatural. Collecting dead things, poking around in the dirt like a man, spouting nonsense about science. A hush fell over the nearby crowd as people turned to watch. Fiona felt the familiar weight of judgment pressing down on her, threatening to crush the fragile sense of belonging she had begun to cultivate. Luke stepped forward, placing himself between Fiona and Tanner. "You rejected her without even meeting her, based on gossip and your own narrow mind. That was your mistake, the best mistake you ever made." His voice carried clearly in the silence. "Because it gave me the chance to know the most intelligent, fascinating woman I've ever met," Tanner scoffed. "She's odd, McAllister, everyone sees it." "She's extraordinary," Luke countered, his voice rising with conviction. "And I won't have you or anyone else in this town disrespecting my wife." A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Fiona herself couldn't suppress a small sound of shock. Luke seemed to realize what he had said a moment after the words left his mouth. He turned to face her, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "I had intended a more private moment for this," he said, his voice gentler now, "but since circumstances have forced my hand." He took her trembling fingers in his. "Fiona Blackwood, I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife, not because you need my protection or my name, but because I have come to admire and care for you more deeply than I ever thought possible." The world seemed to still around them. Fiona was acutely aware of every sensation, the warmth of Luke's hands around hers, the weight of dozens of watching eyes, the distant call of a night bird, the scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke. "You can't be serious," she whispered, searching his face for any sign of insincerity or impulsive chivalry. "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," Luke replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "Say yes and make me the happiest man in Wyoming territory." Fiona was not a woman given to impulsive decisions. She analyzed, considered, weighed evidence before reaching conclusions. Yet in this moment, looking into Luke's earnest face, she found that the conclusion had already been reached somewhere in the depths of her heart. "Yes," she said, her voice strengthening with certainty. "Yes, I will marry you, Luke McAllister," his face transformed with joy. In a move that scandalized half the town and delighted the other half, Luke swept her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, right there in the middle of the harvest festival. When they parted, breathless and smiling, Howard Tanner had slunk away, and the crowd around them had erupted into a mixture of cheers, whispers, and exclamations. Mrs. Miller was beaming like a woman whose secret plan had come to perfect fruition. "Well," Luke said, grinning down at Fiona, "I reckon we've given them something new to talk about." "Indeed we have," she agreed, surprised to find she didn't mind being the center of attention for once. "Though I must point out, Mr. McAllister, that your proposal lacked certain traditional elements, such as, you neither asked for my hand properly nor offered a ring," she pointed out with mock seriousness. Luke laughed, the sound rich and warm in the night air. "I'll remedy both oversights tomorrow, Mrs. McAllister to be. For now, might I have another dance with my fiancé?" As he led her back to the dancing area, Fiona felt a profound sense of wonder. She had come to Wyoming territory seeking security through marriage to a stranger, a practical arrangement born of necessity. Instead, she had found something infinitely more valuable. A man who valued her precisely for the qualities others had deemed strange, who saw her as she truly was and admired her for it. The following morning, Luke arrived at Mrs. Miller's store with a small velvet box and a properly rehearsed proposal, delivered on one knee before an amused Mrs. Miller and several curious customers. The ring was a simple gold band set with a small, perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," Luke explained as he slipped it onto Fiona's finger. "She always said pearls were more interesting than diamonds, unique products of irritation and persistence, just like the best people." "It's perfect," Fiona whispered, recognizing the significance of his offering this family heirloom. They were married 2 weeks later in Whispering Pines' small church. The ceremony was simple but attended by most of the townspeople, their presence a testament to Luke's standing in the community and, perhaps, to the town's gradual acceptance of Fiona. Martha, Luke's housekeeper, had prepared the wedding feast, served at the ranch that would now be Fiona's home as well. As guests mingled in the yard, eating and drinking in celebration, Fiona found a moment of quiet on the porch, taking in the scene with a sense of unreality. Luke joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Having second thoughts, Mrs. McAllister, the name sent a pleasant shiver through her. Not second thoughts, perhaps wondering thoughts. How did this happen? How did I arrive here rejected and end up? She gestured to the celebration, to the ring on her finger, to him. Some might call it fate, Luke suggested, or perhaps just the natural consequence of two people finding what they didn't know they were looking for. A scientific explanation, Fiona approved. Complementary elements forming an unexpected but stable compound, Luke laughed. "I do love the way your mind works." He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "And the rest of you as well, if that wasn't clear." His kiss was gentle, but held the promise of deeper passion to come when their guests had departed. Fiona found herself both nervous and eager for that moment to be truly his wife in every sense. As darkness fell and the last guests departed, Martha tactfully retired to her small cabin near the barn, leaving the main house to the newlyweds. Fiona stood in the bedroom, their bedroom now, taking in the solid furniture, the quilted bed, the small touches that spoke of Luke's practical nature and unexpected aesthetic sense. He entered quietly, having locked up the house and banked the fires. For a moment they regarded each other in silence, the reality of their union settling around them like a tangible presence. "I want you to know," Luke said finally, "that I have no expectations beyond what you're comfortable with. We have time, Fiona." His consideration touched her deeply. "I'm not afraid," she replied honestly, "just unpracticed. My knowledge of marital relations is primarily theoretical." A smile tugged at his lips. "Theoretical, is it? Based on scientific texts, I suppose, and observation of animal behavior, Fiona added, feeling her cheeks warm. Though I recognize that human coupling is considerably more complex due to emotional factors and social constructs. Luke crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Perhaps this is one area where direct experience might be more instructive than theory, he suggested gently, a practical experiment. Fiona's voice was breathier than she intended, if you're willing. His thumbs traced circles on her palms, sending unexpected tingles up her arms. I am, with infinite patience, Luke introduced Fiona to the physical aspects of marriage. His touch was reverent, his guidance gentle as he helped her navigate unfamiliar sensations and responses. What began as awkward exploration transformed into something profound and moving as their bodies learned each other's rhythms and desires. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the curtains, Fiona marveled at the journey that had brought her here from lonely spinster in Boston to beloved wife in Wyoming territory. "What are you thinking?" Luke murmured against her hair. "That I'm grateful Howard Tanner rejected me without meeting me," she replied honestly. "Had he not, I might never have found you." Luke's arms tightened around her. "Then I owe the man a debt, though I doubt he'd appreciate my gratitude." He kissed her temple. "Get some rest, wife. Tomorrow I'll help you set up a proper space for your specimen collection." It was this simple acceptance of her passions, this willingness to incorporate her interests into their shared life, that confirmed for Fiona that she had indeed found something rare and precious. As she drifted towards sleep in her husband's embrace, she felt a sense of completion that had eluded her throughout her previous life. The transition to ranch life brought expected challenges, but also unexpected joys. Luke had converted a small outbuilding into a workroom for Fiona's scientific pursuits, installing shelves for her specimens and a large table for her to work at. He often joined her there in the evenings, genuinely interested in her latest discoveries and theories. For her part, Fiona embraced her role as ranch mistress with characteristic thoroughness. She studied animal husbandry, consulted with successful ranchers' wives, and applied her scientific mind to the practical problems of ranch management. Her knowledge of plants proved valuable when livestock fell ill, and her meticulous record-keeping improved the ranch's profitability within the first year. The townsfolk of Whispering Pines gradually adjusted their perception of the strange mail-order bride. When influenza swept through the community that winter, Fiona's herbal remedies saved several lives, including that of the mayor's young daughter. When spring came, her advice on crop rotation and soil management helped several small farms improve their yields. "You've become quite the local sage," Luke remarked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "Hardly that," Fiona demurred. "I simply apply what I know where it might be useful." "And that's exactly what this territory needs: practical knowledge applied with care." Luke took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "I'm proud of you, you know. Not everyone would have persevered after being rejected as you were." Fiona leaned against his shoulder. "I had little choice at the time. Now, though, I would choose this life even if I had 1,000 other options." As their first anniversary approached, Fiona began experiencing unexpected fatigue and morning nausea. Having read extensively on the subject, she recognized the symptoms before consulting the town doctor to confirm her suspicion. She planned a special dinner to share the news with Luke, preparing his favorite dishes with Martha's assistance. When he returned from a day of working with the cattle, she was waiting on the porch, a small wrapped package in her hands. "What's this?" Luke asked, kissing her in greeting. "Our anniversary isn't for another week." "An early gift," Fiona replied, unable to contain her smile. "Open it." Inside the box was a tiny pair of knitted booties. Luke stared at them uncomprehendingly for a moment before understanding dawned in his eyes. "Fiona, are you?" She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "In approximately 7 months you will be a father, Mr. McAllister." Luke whooped with delight, lifting her carefully in his arms and spinning her around the porch. "A baby, our baby." His face was alight with wonder and happiness. "Are you feeling well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting?" Fiona laughed at his barrage of concerned questions. "I'm perfectly fine, Luke. Pregnancy is a natural process, not an illness. Even so, you'll take care, won't you?" His hand moved to rest gently on her still flat abdomen. "Both of you, of course." She covered his hand with hers. "I've already begun documenting the progression of symptoms and physical changes. It's a fascinating process from a scientific perspective." Luke's laugh was tender. "Only you would approach motherhood as a scientific study." "It helps me process the emotional aspects," Fiona admitted, "which are considerable and sometimes overwhelming." Luke's expression softened. "You're going to be an extraordinary mother, Fiona. Our child will be the most thoroughly educated, deeply loved little person in all of Wyoming territory." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Fiona maintained her activities as long as possible, simply adapting them to her changing body. Luke hovered protectively, though he tried to disguise his concern behind practical assistance and tender care. Their son was born on a clear spring morning in 1880, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his healthy lungs to the world. Luke paced outside the bedroom during the delivery, only Martha and the midwife attending Fiona. When finally invited in, he approached the bed with reverent steps, his eyes fixed on the small bundle in his wife's arms. "Luke," Fiona said softly, "meet your son." He sank onto the edge of the bed, one finger gently tracing the perfect outline of the baby's cheek. "He's beautiful," Luke whispered. "Perfect. I thought we might name him Frederick after my father," Fiona suggested. "Frederick Lucas McAllister." "A fine name for a fine boy," Luke agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned forward to kiss Fiona's forehead. "Thank you for this gift, my love." As spring bloomed into summer, young Frederick Fred, as they came to call him, thrived under his parents' devoted care. Luke built a cradle that could be moved between rooms, ensuring the baby was always near at hand. Fiona, true to her nature, kept detailed records of his development, noting each milestone with scientific precision and maternal pride. One evening, as summer's heat began to wane toward autumn, Luke found Fiona in her workroom. Fred was asleep in his cradle nearby while she sorted through pressed wildflowers, organizing them in her herbarium. "Still at work?" Luke asked, coming to stand behind her and massage her shoulders gently. She leaned into his touch. "Just finishing. These specimens need to be properly labeled before I forget their properties." Luke glanced at the sleeping baby. He's going to grow up thinking all mothers collect plants and rocks and write scientific observations. "Would that be so terrible?" Fiona asked, a hint of old insecurity in her voice. "It would be wonderful," Luke assured her. "He'll know that curiosity and knowledge are to be valued, not feared, that being different isn't something to hide." He turned her to face him. "And he'll know that being exactly who you are can lead to finding exactly where you belong." Fiona rose on tiptoe to kiss him, her heart full of gratitude for this man who had embraced her peculiarities as strengths. "I love you, Luke McAllister. And I love you, Fiona McAllister, my strange, wonderful, perfect wife." As they stood together in the fading light, their child sleeping peacefully beside them, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Rejected and labeled as too strange, she had found acceptance and love where she least expected it. In Luke's arms, in their home, in the life they were building together, she had discovered that being different wasn't a flaw to overcome, but a gift to be celebrated. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life marking their seasons. Fred grew from infant to toddler to curious child, joined 2 years later by a sister they named Alina. Both children inherited their mother's inquisitive mind and their father's steady temperament, a combination that led to both fascinating discoveries and occasional mishaps. By the time Fred was 8 and Alina 6, the McAllister Ranch had prospered significantly. Luke's sound management combined with Fiona's scientific approach had resulted in healthier livestock, better crop yields, and expanded holdings. Their home had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family and Fiona's ever-expanding collection of specimens, which now included contributions from their children. Fiona herself had gained recognition beyond Whispering Pines. Her detailed studies of local flora and their medicinal properties had been published in scientific journals back east, bringing correspondence from fellow naturalists and occasional visits from university professors eager to explore the region under her guidance. Luke took immense pride in his wife's accomplishments, never once showing resentment or discomfort at her growing reputation. Instead, he facilitated her work however he could, building additional shelving for her specimens, constructing a small greenhouse where she could cultivate rare plants, even arranging for special books and equipment to be shipped from as far away as San Francisco and New York. Their partnership had deepened over the years, each supporting the other's strengths while compensating for weaknesses. Where Luke was practical and grounded, Fiona brought vision and innovation. Where she sometimes became lost in theoretical possibilities, he provided focus and implementation. "Do you ever regret it?" Fiona asked one evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Regret what?" Luke turned to her, his face still handsome at 44, though lines of experience had carved themselves around his eyes and mouth. "Marrying me, taking on a wife who collects dead insects and spends hours writing about rock formations." Luke's laugh was warm and genuine. "Fiona McAllister, after 12 years together, you can still ask such a question." He took her hand, rubbing his thumb over the wedding band that had never left her finger. "Marrying you was the wisest decision I ever made. You've brought wonder into my life, intelligence to my table, and love beyond measure to my heart." Fiona squeezed his hand, emotion tightening her throat. At 38, she had grown more comfortable with such feelings, no longer analyzing them quite so clinically. "I sometimes think of Howard Tanner," she admitted. "If he hadn't rejected me, then I would have had to fight him for you," Luke interrupted with a grin. "And that would have been messy." "Luke, be serious." "I am serious." His expression sobered. "Fiona, what happened with Tanner was a blessing, not a tragedy. It set you on the path that led to us, to Fred and Alina, to this life we've built." He gestured to their home, their land, their children. "I wouldn't change a single step of that journey." As if sensing they were being discussed, Fred and Alina bounded up the porch steps, cheeks flushed with exertion and hands cupped around captured fireflies. "Look, Mama." Alina opened her hands slightly to reveal the glowing insect within. "It's Photinus piralis, just like in your book." Fiona beamed at her daughter's correct identification. "Well done, Alina, and what do you remember about its bioluminescent properties?" As Alina launched into a detailed explanation that would have impressed a university professor, Fred leaned against his father's chair. "Pa, can we camp by the creek tomorrow? I want to try catching some of those salamanders we saw last week." "If your chores are done and your mother approves," Luke agreed, ruffling his son's dark hair so like his own. "Though I suspect your interest has more to do with science than recreation." Fred grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "Ma says all recreation can be scientific if you pay attention." "Your mother is a wise woman," Luke said, winking at Fiona over the children's heads. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Luke and Fiona stood together at their bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of their ranch. "You know what today is?" Luke asked, his arms encircling her from behind. Fiona frowned slightly. "It's not our anniversary, nor your birthday. 12 years ago today, I first saw you crouched by that stream, examining rocks when any sensible person would have been seeking shade from the sun." His voice was warm with memory. "I thought you were the most peculiar, fascinating woman I'd ever laid eyes on. And now," Fiona turned in his arms to face him, "now I know you're the most peculiar, fascinating woman I've ever laid eyes on," he replied with a smile. "And I thank God every day that Howard Tanner was too blind to see what was right in front of him." Fiona reached up to trace the beloved contours of her husband's face. "I once thought I was too strange to be loved," she confessed softly, "too different to belong anywhere." "You belong right here," Luke assured her, drawing her closer. "With me, with our children, with your rocks and plants and insects." His kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of promises made and kept through years of shared life. and you'll always be exactly strange enough for me, Fiona McAllister. As she melted into her husband's embrace, Fiona reflected on the remarkable journey from rejection to acceptance, from loneliness to love. The mail-order bride deemed too strange had found her perfect match not in spite of her differences, but because of them. In Luke's arms, in the home they had built together, in the family they had created, she had discovered the most important scientific truth of all. That love, when genuine, embraces the whole person, peculiarities and all. And as the years continued to pass, as their children grew and the ranch prospered, as Fiona's scientific reputation expanded and Luke's quiet strength supported them all, that truth remained constant, a foundation as solid as the Wyoming bedrock beneath their feet. The strange mail-order bride and her cowboy husband had created something rare and precious. A life where differences were celebrated, curiosity was encouraged, and love was the most natural science of all.